Hello, and welcome to California Convictions live stream for Tuesday. I'm hopeful that my audio and my video are finally the way they're supposed to be, and I'd just like to thank anybody who's stuck with me as long as they have. I was thinking today about doing that first night. Whether it's in county jail, you just got arrested and you don't even know what's going on, or it's your first night in the pen, you just got off that bus. Even if you've done a couple of years, but they moved you to a new pen or a new part of the prison, it's still a very similar feel. You've ever slept in a hotel or the guest room at a friend's house? You wake up in the middle of the night and you're not quite sure where you are? Well, it's like that, except, a million times worse, because you know where you are. You're in prison. And you wake up and the door is locked and it's dark and you have that moment where you're trying to figure out what happened. Where are you? What's going on? If you're just starting your time, that what's going on moment can stretch because you really don't know. Hey, Sick Army, Shaliste girl, thanks for checking in. You really don't know what's going to happen. If you're looking at real time, 10 years, 30 years, the death penalty, you wake up at night, you're in this strange cell, and even once you know where you are, your mind starts racing. You listen to the sounds in the hallway, and they're new sounds. It's a new environment. Maybe the guy down the tier snores, and it's the first time you've heard it. Everyone else is used to it. First thing in the morning, come 6 a.m., you've been waiting all night, and you notice the lights finally come on, and then there's the toilet symphony is what I've heard it called. You got 100 guys on a tier. They all use the restroom first thing in the morning, and you can hear every one of them. It's flush, flush. Maybe there's a guy who goes to work, and you'll hear the slam of his door as he processes out. Once you've been there for a couple of weeks, you get used to these sounds, and it's just the normal thing that you hear. But that first morning, they're all foreign and new and, frankly, terrifying. I remember a story that I heard, and this isn't my story. I heard it from an HA that I did time with, and I don't doubt that it's true, as in, if he was making it up, it happened to somebody else. He said that he was in county jail, 4-man pod, and him and his 2 friends, they've been in the pod for a while, and they get along just fine, bunch of old biker guys. One day, a new kid moves into the pod, and this is in county jail. They don't know what he's in for, and he must be 18 because they moved him into the pod. But he must just be 18 because he looks like he's about 16. And he takes his bed, and he walks over to the very corner of the room and sets his bed down in the corner of the room, and he turns towards the wall, and he just starts crying. This is awkward. Frank, Jim, and Bob, the 3 old HA guys, they kind of just sit down and try and ignore him, give him his space. Kid's hurting. They don't know what's going on. For all they know, he was just in a shootout with the cops and his brother died. It's unlikely. But you don't come to prison or jail because little things happened, and he's lying in the corner just crying. They go about their evening. They have their dinner. They offer him his, and he just cries and hides in the corner. They leave it there until the cops come to pick it up, and then lights out and count, and finally they're trying to wind down for the night. It's lights out, and they can't put up with it anymore. It's been 2 hours, a youngster crying in the corner. So Frank goes over and, real quiet and calm-like, sits down and goes, "Hey, youngster, are you all right, man? Do you need something? Can we help you?" And the kid, just a tear-stained, snot-stained, giant mess in his pillow where he's been hiding from the world, rolls over and looks at him and goes, "You're not going to rape me, are you?" And Frank just felt like the biggest jerk in the world. Because it had been 3 hours of them trying to give that kid his space because they don't know him. And the whole time he thought they were just, waiting for the lights to go out to do something awful. And that is the thing about that first night. The point that I'm trying to make is it is a foreign environment. You don't know. We haven't a conception of what prison's going to be like. Maybe we saw the Shawshank Redemption and we think they're going to fresh fish us as we walk onto the tier. Fresh fish, fresh fish. harassing the new guy, see if maybe he'll start blubbering. Well, in reality, most people in prison, even if they're not nice or kind people, well, they're not quite stupid enough to make an enemy of every new guy that gets off the bus. That seems self-destructive. In reality, whenever you hit a new area, a new jail, a new prison, a new pod, almost universally, people are pretty dang kind to you. There's a welcome committee of some type. If you're on the line, it's probably your people, your gang, or your race, or whatever. There's somebody whose job it is. I had the job at one point. Whenever a new guy walked onto the yard, if he came into my building, I'd walk up. Hey, how you doing? I'm Aaron. Hey, do you need some shower shoes? You need some envelopes, some stamps. You got to write a letter to your people? Hey, do you need to get phone time? I can get you phone time so you can get a call. And so you know, Stu, down there in 120 something. You got to take your paperwork to him. You got to go show him what you're in on. You know, you got to show him and you got to show your cellie if this is your first term. It's a double thing. You look out for him a little, maybe a couple of soups, a bar of soap, some shower shoes, and you let them know they got to check in. They got to let people know what their paperwork is. That's the welcome wagon on the line. SNY, it's a little bit less official, I suppose, but there is still almost always somebody who's going to see you. Maybe you know him, maybe he just happens to see you walking around not knowing what's going on. But if you're a first-termer and you're walking around just confused as can be, 9 times out of 10, somebody's going to come over and say, hey man, let me give you a hand, things are going to be all right, here's what you got to do. And that other 10th time, it might be somebody looking to take advantage of you because this is prison, it's not a fairy tale world. Gosh, I've only been talking for 6 minutes and I exhausted most of what I wanted to talk about. The feeling of waking up for that first night in the jail. If anybody was interested in any aspect of doing time, being incarcerated, I'm happy to talk about it if you shoot a question up in the comments. Short of that, I think I'm going to talk about my experience, my first day in jail. I'd been interrogated for a good chunk of time. I think it was 3 or 4 hours. Only about an hour of it ended up in the official tape, I was told. But it was lengthy, and they were not polite the entire time. They really wanted me to crack and give them whatever information they wanted. So, after I went to the hospital, gave my DNA, and was moved to the jail, I was done. I was so tired. Unfortunately, the officers at the jail, well, they arranged I guess a party for me whenever I got there. There were 6 of them. They pushed me around a little, not a lot, called me a couple of names, asked if I felt like a big man killing a Marine. The fact he was a serial pedophile and a Marine, I guess that didn't factor, but whatever. And after I got slapped around just a little, and I want to be clear, just a little, they took my photograph 15 minutes later, and it's not like I was bleeding or marred, but no question about it, these 6 guys were waiting to slap me around a little when I got to the jail. Well, after that, you process in. They're going to take your picture. They're going to fill out a little bit of paperwork. They're going to take all your clothes and put them in bags or boxes or whatnot. They took my belt and my shoelaces were the things they were primarily concerned with. And I was placed into, I guess it was a drunk tank. There's only one other guy there. He's a big guy, and he was dead drunk. I was there for about 3 hours before breakfast, and he did roll over enough to kind of stumble to the door and get his breakfast. I guess he knew the program. I didn't. I gave him my breakfast, too, because there's no way I was going to eat on that first day in jail. I suppose that's another thing that is a universal experience. I doubt anybody eats their breakfast that first day. You wake up and your stomach is in a knot like that. The Wolf wants to know about Wes Watson. I can talk about him for a minute. I had never heard of him prior to my release, and I don't think he had a big name in the system. There's some guys that if they were walking around, I would have went, hey, isn't that such and such? Wes Watson, to my understanding, did not have a big name. He even went out of state near the end of his term. Since he got out, he's done a lot of good things from what I've seen. I saw some guys who were alcoholics or drug addicts who said that he helped them quite a bit turn their life around. He is a motivational speaker. He's got that silver tongue. That said, I do wish that less of his video titles and less of his video stuff had to do with being a big man in prison, running gangs, being a shot caller. To my understanding, he never says that he did any of those things. I believe he says one time that he had a friend who told him he was third in line to be the shot caller on a yard or something like that. I don't think that's exactly how it works, at least not in my experience, but even if it did, that's a pretty low bar, especially on 2 and 3 yards. I don't think he was playing politics. I think he was doing his time, working out, and planning on getting out and being a motivational speaker or a personal trainer or something like that. I've actually been involved in his fitness group a little bit. He helped me lose my weight, and that's something that I just can't speak ill of the man after he helped me do that. That said, it is my understanding that he was programming out of state whenever the whites were at war with the Norteños. That means that he might not be able to go back to the line, and I haven't heard that addressed by anybody else. The whites were at war with the Norteños real bad at a given time, and I wasn't there. I rolled up, went SNY. It's one of the reasons I couldn't go back to the line. If I walk on the yard, somebody's going to say, hey, were you whenever this was happening? Why weren't you standing with us? The Wolf, if he says he has the keys, and look, I'm not a shot caller, I'm not involved in politics, so I don't know. I do not believe that is the case. And if somebody has the keys to a yard and gets out and talks about it, what's the idea of gangster rap? If you're really a hardcore gangster, a criminal, and you're not reformed, you're running shit, running stuff, well, you probably don't talk about it that much. I do talk about prison stuff, and I need to be real clear, is I wouldn't bust a grape. I wasn't doing big things whenever I was down, and I'm not doing big things now. Prison politics scared the hell out of me. If you'd told me Frank John is coming onto the yard and he runs stuff, he can have people killed, it doesn't matter if you're a guard or an inmate, I wouldn't have talked to Frank John. I would have sat in my cell and tried to avoid him. And LT Train 45, look, I haven't researched the stuff. What I can tell you is he's a heck of a motivational speaker. It is my understanding that he was out of state at a time whenever we were warring with the whenever the Peckerwoods and the Skinheads and whatnot, like I'm a member of that group. Whenever the white prison gangs were warring with the Norteños, it was an all hands on deck thing from what I understand, and you weren't supposed to leave the state. I don't know. And even if he has a little bit of smut on his jacket, as it were, I have so much more on mine. And I'm not looking to judge anybody for not wanting to be a part of the prison gang culture. I do wish fewer of his videos had things like shot collar or keys to the yard in it. But if he's getting his message out and he's helping people, well, that's ultimately what's important, I think. How many prisons was I at while I was incarcerated? I started at Mendocino County Jail. Of course, I did a couple of months there, almost a year. I went to High Desert State Prison in Northern California, and I did, I think about 6 years there. After that, I went to SADF, which is New Corcoran. It's across the street from the Corcoran Shoe, where they have some of the big scary guys, and the famous PHU, where they housed Charles Manson. I stayed there at SADF for, I think about 5 years. And then I went to Chino for about a year and a half, and then Chowchilla for about a year. That's all the pens that I did time at. I've been trying to kind of intersperse stories here and there to give a feel, because each of those pens really had a different flavor. It's incredible how you get on a bus at San Quentin, which I left San Quentin off the list. I did reception time at San Quentin. It's incredible how you get on a bus at San Quentin feeling like prison runs one way. The inmates are all these guys. 6 hours later, you get off the bus and the hallways are still the same, the cells are still the same, the environment is the same, but nothing is the same. You can go from some soft candy yard where you walked around with your shower shoes all day long not tripping, to just some place where you're not sure you're going to live out the day because everybody has a piece. And everything else is the same, it's just they changed out the people. They put you on a bus and moved you to another yard. Were the Northerners always at war with the Woods? That's actually a difficult question because officially, while I was doing time, it's my understanding that they're working on changing things now. But officially, here in California, the whites and the blacks had separate sides of the day room, and it was a real clear thing. They didn't interact at all. It was as much a distance as could be put between the two groups. The Southsiders programmed with the whites. The Sereno, pardon me, the Sereno Hispanics, and the Norteños programmed with the blacks. And there really wasn't a lot of carryover between the two groups. I was at High Desert, and really the only interaction that I had with Northerners outside of the one or two that I worked with, so I was able to interact with them outside of the day room where everybody was one time whenever I accidentally walked through the corner of the designated Norteño area. And you have to understand that areas are very clearly designated. And I don't just mean the yellow lines that the cops drew to let you know what's out of bounds, what's too close to an electric fence or something like that. I mean that every table in a day room, every shower in a day room, every square inch of a day room belongs to somebody. This 6-foot chunk there belongs to this group, and those 3 tables belong to the whites. And that phone over there, well, you better check with the Northerners before you use that phone, because that's their phone. And people in prison have very little. People are ready to bleed or die over something like whose table is whose or whose phone is whose. Well, I walked through the Northern area. And I just cut the corner. Rather than walking all the way around the square, I took 2 steps and cut through the side where nobody was. My friend, and he was a friend because I'd worked with him, who was a Norteño, and I'm here trying to think up a name for him. We'll call him Savage again. It wasn't the same Savage from the story before. Well, Savage come up to me and he says, hey, Aaron, hey, let me talk to you for a second. And I was kind of busy. I told him, hey, let me get at you in a minute, Savage. And he raised his voice just a little. He went, no, man, we got to talk. I turned and looked at him, and he was not squared up. But his body language had changed. He was asserting. And he told me, look, dude, I'm security today for my group. And you just cut through our corner, and I'm here to tell you don't do that again. It'll be a real problem. We'll have to go talk to your shot caller about it. I was pretty good with Savage. Like, we'd been at my job just a couple of days before, talking bullcrapping. This was a different dude. He was doing his job, and he was telling me that I could live or die upon my willingness to follow this little rule, because if I kept breaking it, they'd have to do something. I don't have a single tat, actually. I almost picked up one that I wanted that my friend Mason was going to do for me. It was the MC Escher, Angels and Demons. I wanted to get it for a back piece with the angels and demons covering my back. But then I really thought about it, and you're walking around with that thing for the rest of your life, and I didn't do it. It's funny because some days I regret it. That was a wicked tattoo, and he was a great artist, and he had actual from the streets ink that somebody had brought in for him, so he could have done as good of a job as anybody could have. I'm sure if I wanted that tat today, it'd probably cost me $500, maybe more. We were tied. He would do it no problem, and I kind of regret not getting it done, but I don't regret not having it, if that makes any sense. Here in NC, skinheads are seen as gay. Look up skinhead on Wikipedia, and you'll see they're popular in the San Francisco gay community. I honestly couldn't speak to what's going on in that group. And, in prison, there was a lot of don't ask, don't tell. Even amongst the more serious or dangerous guys, I have no doubt that behind closed doors, occasionally, cellies happen to have different relationships than they talk about in public. That's their business, I suppose. I'm going to go back to talking about that first night in prison or jail for just another couple of minutes, except I want to talk about going to the hole. First night in the hole. You went out on the yard, maybe you were on a mission, or heck, maybe you were the target of the mission and somebody got you. But either way, it's abrupt. You tell your cellie, all right, man, I'll see you whenever I come in from yard, and you go out and something happens. And they spray you or cuff you up or drag you to a cage. And you don't go back to your cell. You don't say, hey, let me go get my phone book. Let me just go turn off my hot pod, or let me go get my glasses. I knew a dude that ended up doing about 2 months back in the hole saying, I need my glasses, I can't see, before they finally brought them to him, because he'd gotten pulled out of his cell without having them on him at the time. It's against the rules. They're supposed to provide that type of thing to you, but that abrupt change carries over. They drag you to the hole, and you get your dinner, and the lights go off, and you try and adjust to this new environment. You wait for the paperwork to tell you how much time you're going to pick up, where you're going to get transferred. There's nothing else in there. Your TV, your books, all that is gone. Oh, wonderful. Glenda managed to make it to one of my live streams. Thanks for everybody who's shouting out in the comments. It gives me something to read, and we all know I love to read, but it also lets me try and interact with the people listening and hopefully talk about aspects of my experiences while incarcerated that are interesting. The one other thing about that first night and the hole and the jail and the prison, and it's going to depend on who you are, but you have to remember that this is how things are moved from one place to another. Whenever you come into the hole or to your new pen, your new yard, there's at least 1 or 2 guys who look up and try and get an idea. What tattoos does he have? Do I know him? Does anybody know him? After all, you might have some dope. You might have some of them hot kites that give the information that they need. You might have the connect. You might be the guy who's going to have somebody bring him a couple of grams of the good stuff over in the visiting room in that weekend. Everybody is sizing you up for the immediate value that you have to them. What if you're Mexican and white? And that's an interesting question, because by and large, people are allowed to say they are what they are in prison. I had an acquaintance whose last name was McBride, and he was very dark. If I had looked at him, I would have told you he was African American. That would have been a problem. He ran with the Southerners, and so he was a Southerner, and that's just what it was. I have no idea how they compensate for the paperwork on that, but I do know that you can be a member of a gang while being a different ethnic group. The groups that have the hardest time with this are the whites and the blacks. I don't think that I ever saw anybody who was dark enough that he could reasonably have been African American running with the whites, the Caucasians. I did see a couple of times that there were white guys who were running with the blacks, either as Blood or Crip. A big riot that kicked off at High Desert and was the precursor to B Yard getting shut down and flipped was because they had moved a gentleman into the gymnasium who was a tall white guy who ran with the Crips. He said he was Jamaican, that his father was dark as hell and that his mother was light-skinned, and that he just happens to be more light-skinned than either of them. And you would think this would be his business and nobody would care, but it turned into a big issue of contention. Because amongst the whites, especially amongst the skinheads, if there is a white dude who's claiming to be something else, they're supposed to get involved. There was a sneak attack in the gymnasium where a bunch of people got hurt. Not thousands or hundreds even, but I think 10 or 15 people got hurt pretty good, and I think 2 or 3 got stabbed. And that was the beginning of the end there on B Yard. They shut things down, and people just kept rolling up until eventually the yard flipped. In the comments, people are speaking about whether you can lose territory. You know, like whether the blacks would give up their basketball court if, things went too far. I never saw anybody lose territory or gain territory. I never even heard of that happening. Now, mind you, you can get stabbed over it. You can bleed over it. But at the end of the day, the administration's probably just going to step in and move people in and out until things become stable again. Occasionally, there might be a negotiation for territory. Maybe they moved half of the Southsiders off the yard, and so we talk about maybe having one of their tables get transferred over to being a white table or something like that. Or There aren't very many guys amongst the others who are using the dip bars, so would it be okay if those dip bars were only other dip bars for half the day instead of the whole day? And these could be contentious negotiations, and I suppose can end with people fighting or killing each other. But then the yard gets locked down, and the blood gets washed off, and the cops let everybody out, and they do it again, and I think at the end of the day, you end up maintaining parity. You have to understand that the administration on these yards, they have what are called demographic milestones. This means that all of these prison yards have a certain number of whites or blacks or northerners or southerners or whatever group that are supposed to be on the yard. It's supposed to be 20% that and 30% that and 8% this. The cops do a great job of moving people in and out to keep that number pretty accurate. So whenever the inmates are divvying up tables and showers and things like that, it ends up being pretty stable once the initial chaos of opening up a new yard has settled. Carlos Ramos wants to know why I went SNY. It was at the end of this thing at High Desert that I was just talking about, where the whites and the blacks had a problem with each other. There had been a sneak attack in the gym, and the whites, the Caucasian inmates, especially the skinheads, wanted to, as it was expressed, get their get-backs. The means by which they wanted to get revenge on the blacks was pretty extreme. They wanted to murder two elderly gentlemen and explicitly and very carefully make sure that they died, not injure them, but murder them. I stuck my nose in business that I didn't have to. I could have just left it alone. I wrote a kite, I sent it into the cops, and then rather than making it so that I didn't get found out, the cops pretty loudly announced that Channel over there in 129 was the dude who dropped the kite. I didn't go back on the yard after that. I told him I had to go SNY, and I did not look back. Having done time on both sides of the system, and mind you, I was only active until 2007, so I don't know what it's like since then. I much preferred the SNY, because you weren't expected to adhere to other people's program or other people's moral principles. It was a little bit like the Wild West, though, as you really had to take care of yourself, and you had to be prepared to look out for yourself, because if you had a problem, you couldn't raise your hand and ask for reinforcements. You were on your own, by and large. I am going to be wrapping up my live stream in the next couple of minutes. I was shooting for about a half hour. I wanted to thank everybody for popping in today. I hope that I gave a little bit of information about what it's like doing time, and ideally I edified just a little. I don't just want to entertain. Sincerely, thank you for listening today, and I'll be back again doing a live stream next week, and I hope to put up a couple of decent videos this week. Have a nice day.